On the 25th of December, 1996, soft snow drifted down over the tree-lined, wealthy neighborhoods of Boulder, Colorado. The dark, winter cold bit at any exposed skin, but at 755 15th Street, the Ramsey family's large brick mansion glowed with warm Christmas lights that cut through the dark. The cold air carried the sharp scent of pine from the outdoor trees, and the faint, sweet smell of leftover holiday cookies that lingered around the porch. Inside, the house had already gone quiet after a long day of celebration. The Ramseys had just returned from a Christmas dinner with friends. Their 2 children were already asleep, tucked into their beds down the hallway. 9-year-old Burke Ramsey lay in his room, the door pulled almost shut behind him. 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey had fallen asleep in the living room after the long day. Her father, John, carried her small body down the hall to her bed. Her mother, Patsy, stepped into the dim room after him, pulled the covers up tight around JonBenét, and made one last check of the room before she pulled the door closed. The whole house settled into the deep hush of a snowy winter night. No one in that quiet home would see JonBenét alive again. The next morning, the 26th of December, 1996, Patsy Ramsey woke at 5:52 a.m. The alarm had not gone off yet, but the pre-dawn dark, seeping through the curtains, was enough to rouse her. The family planned to catch an early flight to their vacation home in Michigan, so she had prepared everything the night before. She pushed back the covers and swung her feet onto the cold hardwood floor. She padded down the carpeted staircase, one slow step at a time, her socks muffling her footsteps. The house was still mostly quiet, only the faint hum of the furnace breaking the silence. She was heading to the kitchen to start the coffee, to get everything ready for the drive to the airport. Halfway down the stairs, something caught her eye. 3 sheets of lined paper, stacked neatly on the edge of one of the lower steps. They were handwritten, in dark ink. Patsy stopped. She did not remember leaving paper there. No one in the family had left anything on that step the night before. She leaned forward, bracing one hand on the banister, and reached down to pick the sheets up. She lifted them to eye level, squinting in the dim pre-dawn light. Her eyes scanned the first line across the top of the top sheet. She processed the words. In that instant, all the strength drained out of her legs. Her knees buckled. She slid down against the side of the staircase, the paper crumpling slightly in her loose grip. The 3 pages were a ransom note. It claimed JonBenét had been kidnapped. It demanded money for her safe return. Patsy Ramsey did not follow the note's instructions to wait. She fumbled for the nearest wall phone, fingers shaking so bad she misdialed twice before she got the 911 operator on the line. She gasped out her address, told them her daughter had been kidnapped, and waited. Police cars pulled up to the Ramsey mansion within 7 minutes of the call. The first officers stepped through the front door, still under the impression this was an active kidnapping, not a murder. Close friends of the Ramseys were called over for support, and they showed up within minutes. Relatives arrived soon after. Soon, the entire home filled with people. Officers moved through every room checking for intruders. Friends made coffee in the kitchen, opening cabinets and grabbing mugs that had been untouched that morning. Relatives sat on the living room sofas, leaning on armrests, touching door frames as they walked to the bathroom. Everyone who stepped through the house left their own traces and wiped away whatever the intruder might have left behind. Because investigators believed this was an open kidnapping, they only cordoned off JonBenét's bedroom. They left the rest of the home completely open to foot traffic. With every step, every hand on a doorknob, every cup lifted from a counter, vital forensic evidence was being smudged, smothered, or destroyed entirely. What looked like standard procedure to comfort a grieving family would turn out to be one of the most catastrophic mistakes in the history of modern criminal investigation. It would plague the case from the very first hour, and it would never be undone. Everyone in the house turned their eyes to the landline phone sitting on the entryway table. The ransom note had been clear. A call would come between 8 and 10 that morning with instructions for delivering the $118,000 ransom. No one moved far from the line. Detectives pulled the Ramseys into the living room to ask soft, halting questions, but they kept one eye fixed on the phone the whole time. Friends stood in the kitchen, voices lowered to a murmur, every few minutes glancing down the hall to see if the phone had rung. The sun climbed higher above the snow-covered rooftops. The pre-dawn dark faded to a pale winter gray, then to bright mid-morning light that slanted through the front windows. The clock ticked past 8 a.m. It ticked past 9 a.m. Every time a car passed outside, every time the furnace clicked on, heads turned. At 9:47, the phone rang once. Everyone froze. Patsy Ramsey shot forward, hand outstretched to grab the receiver before the second ring. It cut off mid-ring. The line went dead. No caller ID, no follow-up ring. The false hope hung thick in the air, thicker than the smell of cold coffee and burnt toast from the kitchen. The clock ticked past 10 a.m. The promised call never came. No one reached out. No further instructions arrived. Detectives checked the line for malfunctions, confirmed there were no service outages to explain the silence. The kidnappers had vanished. Investigators had no new leads, no fresh clues to follow. The tension in the house coiled tighter every minute. No one dared say what everyone was already starting to think. Something was very wrong. This was not a normal kidnapping. The clock ticked past noon, and still nothing. No call, no word, no breakthrough. At 1 p.m., nearly 7 full hours had passed since Patsy Ramsey had picked up the 3 lined sheets of paper from the staircase. The lead detective on the scene, frustrated by the total lack of movement, made a call. He pulled John Ramsey aside, then asked Fleet White, John's closest friend in Boulder, to join them. He told the 2 men to search every inch of the house, from the attic rafters to the deepest corner of the basement, and look for anything out of the ordinary, anything out of place, anything that didn't belong. No one had done a full, systematic search of the entire property yet. Officers had checked the ground floor and second floor for intruders, but the lower levels had been left mostly untouched. John Ramsey agreed immediately. He had spent the last 7 hours sitting on the sofa, waiting for a call that never came, doing nothing while his daughter was missing. He was ready to move. He and Fleet White started on the top floor, checking every closet, every underbed storage, every locked drawer that might have been opened by an intruder. They worked their way down, room by room, checking the main floor living spaces, the kitchen pantries, the mudroom off the back entrance. Nothing turned up. No broken locks, no missing valuables. No sign that anyone had broken into the home that night. They reached the main staircase that led down to the basement. The door at the top was closed. John Ramsey reached out, wrapped his hand around the brass doorknob, and turned it. Cold air rolled up the stairs toward them, carrying the smell of damp concrete and stored cardboard boxes. Fleet White moved along the west wall, pausing to shift stacked boxes out of the way, checking behind old bookcases and a rolled-up area rug leaning against the foundation. He moved slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light as he worked his way toward the back of the basement. Halfway along the back wall, he spotted a small door set into the concrete, held closed by a simple wooden latch. The paint on the door matched the cinder blocks, so it blended almost completely into the wall. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Fleet White stepped over a loose extension cord coiled on the floor, reached the door, and hooked his thumb under the latch. He pulled the latch up, yanked the door open toward him, and stepped back to let his eyes adjust to the deeper dark inside. The air that rolled out was colder than the rest of the basement, still with a faint smell of old dust and bottled wine. He squinted, trying to make out shapes in the blackness. He could see stacked wooden wine racks along the left wall, a low cement shelf along the back, nothing out of place. A fine spider web strung across the doorframe brushed his cheek, and he flinched, lifting a hand to brush it away. He could have stepped inside, flipped on the light, checked every corner, but the detective had only asked for a search for anything out of the ordinary, and this room looked exactly as it should have. Closed, quiet, undisturbed. Fleet White pulled the door shut, clicked the latch back into place, and turned to check the utility closet on the other side of the basement. He never thought to check again. He never suspected what was waiting in the dark, just behind that closed latch. John Ramsey finished checking the storage room off the east wall, found nothing, and turned to work his way toward the back of the basement. He reached the back wall and stopped in front of the small latched door. He looked at it for a long second, then reached out, hooked his own thumb under the wooden latch, and pulled it up. He flipped the toggle up. The small, windowless room flooded with harsh, yellow overhead light all at once. John Ramsey froze on the threshold. Lying flat on the cold concrete floor in the center of the room was a small, still shape, partially covered by a frayed white blanket. He knew that blanket. JonBenét had carried it with her everywhere since she was a toddler. She would drag it to every family trip, every pageant, every night when she fell asleep on the couch. His breath caught in his throat. He could not pull air into his lungs. For 3 full seconds, he did not move. He told himself it could be anything. It could be a stack of folded linens, a dropped holiday decoration, anything but what his brain was already screaming it was. He forced his feet to move forward. 1 step, then another, across the concrete toward the shape. The closer he got, the more details snapped into focus. A small foot, sticking out from the edge of the blanket, was pale and still. Wrists bound tight above the head with thin white nylon cord. Another length of the same cord wrapped tight around the neck, pulled so far into the skin it was almost hidden. Black duct tape stretched across the mouth, sealing it shut. It was JonBenét. She had been lying there for hours, cold and still in the dark, while her family waited upstairs for a kidnapper's call. John Ramsey's legs almost gave out. He stepped forward, ripped the duct tape from her mouth with a rough, tearing sound, fumbled with the knot at her wrists to free her. He turned and walked out of the wine cellar, back through the cluttered basement, his boots heavy on the concrete steps. In that single, grief-stricken act, critical forensic evidence that could have identified her killer was destroyed forever. By the end of that same day, JonBenét's body was taken to the coroner's office for a full autopsy. The procedure began early the next morning, and the results were finalized just 5 days after her body was found. What the medical examiner saw on the examination table confirmed the worst suspicions that had settled over the case the second John Ramsey carried his daughter up the stairs. This was no open and shut kidnapping that had gone wrong. It was a deliberate, brutal murder. JonBenét died from strangulation by the garrote found wrapped around her neck. But that was not the only fatal injury inflicted that night. A single, brutal blow to the head had left an 8.5-inch fracture running across her entire skull. The impact was so severe it caused catastrophic, irreversible damage to her brain. She had been sexually assaulted before her death. The medical examiner cross-referenced body temperature, rigor mortis, and stomach contents to narrow down the time of death. All markers pointed to the same window. Sometime late on Christmas night, after the Ramsey family had returned home from their holiday dinner, after everyone had climbed the stairs and settled into their beds for the night, while John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey slept peacefully under the same roof, JonBenét was already dead in the dark wine cellar at the back of the basement. The kidnappers who had written the ransom note, who had promised to call that morning for a ransom payment, had never existed. The kidnapping was a lie staged over a murder that had already been completed hours before anyone woke. The case had already shifted, before the first full day of investigation was even over. From a missing person search to a locked-room homicide, one that would confound every investigator who touched it for the next 3 decades. From the very first hours after JonBenét's body was found, the investigation collapsed under the weight of its own cumulative mistakes. The Boulder Police Department had almost no experience handling complex, high-stakes homicide cases. The officers who arrived that morning were trained for small-town routine calls, not a locked-room murder in a wealthy home with national attention already building. The first catastrophic mistake came within minutes. Investigators believed the case was still an open kidnapping, so they did not seal the entire house as a formal crime scene. Only JonBenét's bedroom was cordoned off with tape. Every other room, every hallway, every stairwell where the killer could have walked was left open to anyone who wanted to enter. Close family friends arrived to offer support. Relatives wandered through the living room and kitchen. Officers moved from room to room, opening cabinets, shifting furniture, opening and closing doors. More than 100 people walked through the Ramsey home in the first 12 hours before the entire property was finally locked down. With every step, every hand on a doorknob, every cup set down on a counter, vital forensic evidence was smudged, contaminated, or destroyed entirely. The second major mistake came in the first round of questioning. Officers never separated John and Patsy Ramsey to question them individually on the day the body was found. They allowed the couple to stay together, to coordinate their stories, to consult with each other before answering any question. As suspicion began to creep toward the family, this missed opportunity would haunt the case forever. The mistakes did not stop there. Department leadership shared confidential police files and full evidence reports with the Ramsey family's private defense attorneys before any formal charges had even been filed. What should have been a straightforward murder investigation, with a body found inside the victim's own home, became a tangled mess of missteps, conflicting accounts, and open public conflict between agencies. None of these errors were small, unavoidable oversights. Every one was a preventable failure that narrowed the path to finding the killer. A little more, with each passing hour. The ransom note itself quickly became the most puzzling and damning piece of physical evidence in the entire case. At 2.5 full pages, it was longer than almost any ransom note ever recorded in modern criminal history. Long ransom notes are almost always staged, written by someone with time to plan and adjust their story, not by a professional kidnapper looking to get in and out quickly. When investigators searched the Ramsey home for the source of the paper, they found it tucked away in a plain kitchen drawer. The note had been written on a sheet torn from a notepad that belonged to the Ramsey family. Handwriting experts were brought in immediately to compare the note's slanted, uneven script to known samples from every person connected to the case. They eliminated more than 70 people as possible authors. John Ramsey was definitively cleared as the writer, but no expert could ever definitively rule out Patsy Ramsey. The note contained specific, unusual details that only someone close to the family could have known. It referenced John Ramsey's past military service. It demanded exactly $118,000, a number that was almost exactly equal to the annual bonus John had received from his company that same year. The garrote used to strangle JonBenét only deepened the implication of insider involvement. Investigators traced the broken wooden handle that formed the garrote's tightener to a paintbrush in Patsy Ramsey's personal art supply set. Slowly, lead investigators with the Boulder Police Department began to shift their entire focus to the Ramsey family itself. They became convinced the parents were responsible for covering up an accidental death that quickly escalated into murder. The district attorney's office did not share their certainty. The two agencies began to clash openly. They leaked conflicting information to opposite sides of the press, undermined each other's investigative work at every turn, and turned the entire case into a raucous public spectacle. Through 1997, the Ramseys lived under what the police department itself publicly called an umbrella of suspicion. No charges had been filed, but the label itself was enough to convict them in the court of public opinion. The media coverage was relentless, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Stored footage of JonBenét performing in child beauty pageants flooded every television screen in America. The repeated airings sparked a fierce national debate about the ethics of putting young children in the pageant system. That debate, in turn, cemented a vague but widespread public perception that the Ramseys were somehow to blame for what had happened to their daughter. Poll after poll showed a large majority of Americans were convinced the parents were guilty. John and Patsy Ramsey hired separate, high-powered defense teams. By 1998, more than a year after the murder, the investigation remained a tangled, public mess, with no arrests and no clear path forward. Boulder County took the extraordinary step of convening a grand jury to review every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every mistake made by investigators from the first day the body was found. Jurors spent 13 full months behind closed doors, poring over thousands of pages of documents, listening to testimony from every person connected to the case, and debating the evidence in total secrecy. When their work was complete, they cast their votes. To the shock of everyone following the case, they voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey. The indictment was not a charge of direct murder. It did not claim either parent had directly killed their daughter. Instead, the indictment charged them with covering up the crime, placing their child in a threatening situation that led to her death, and obstructing the official investigation to protect the person who had actually killed JonBenét. The final decision to move forward with the indictment rested entirely with District Attorney Alex Hunter. He reviewed every piece of evidence the grand jury had compiled, weighed the strength of the charges, and made his final ruling. He refused to sign the indictment. He told the public and the press that he did not believe there was enough evidence to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. He ordered the entire indictment sealed, hidden from the public and the press, and kept locked away in official court files. It stayed hidden for 14 full years. No charges were ever filed against John or Patsy Ramsey. With no indictment and no new leads, the case went officially cold. Even after the case went officially cold, tips and new leads continued to trickle in from across the country. Over the years, investigators followed up on dozens of alternate suspects outside the Ramsey family. The first major person of interest was Bill McReynolds, an elderly neighbor who had played Santa Claus at the Ramsey home just 2 days before Christmas. Years before the murder, his wife had written a short amateur play that centered on a child murdered in a family basement. The coincidence was too striking to ignore, and investigators put him under intense scrutiny. He was investigated thoroughly, every alibi checked, every piece of potential evidence tested. All physical and forensic evidence cleared him completely. No connection to the murder was ever found. Next, attention turned to Michael Helgoth, a local handyman in his 20s who had made open, threatening comments about the Ramseys long before JonBenét's death. His initial DNA samples raised enough questions to keep investigators focused on him. But just 8 months after the murder, Helgoth died in what coroners ruled an apparent suicide. No concrete, verifiable connection to the murder was ever proven. The DNA match fell apart under further testing. Years later, investigators turned their attention to Gary Oliva, a convicted sex offender who was already imprisoned for possessing child abuse images. He was interviewed at length, and every possible link to the Ramsey family was tested. His DNA did not match the unknown male sample found at the crime scene. No solid evidence linking him to JonBenét's death ever emerged. For every new lead that brought fresh hope of a break, investigators hit the same dead end. No one could be connected to the murder beyond suspicion and coincidence. Nearly 10 years after JonBenét's murder, the case exploded back into global headlines overnight. In August 2006, a 41-year-old American school teacher named John Mark Carr was arrested in Bangkok, Thailand. He had contacted investigators through encrypted email and offered a full, unprompted confession to the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. He claimed he had followed the Ramsey family for months, drugged JonBenet on Christmas night, sexually assaulted her, and accidentally strangled her to death when she woke and began to struggle. He said he had been with JonBenet when she died, and that he had loved her. The arrest made front-page news in every major country around the world. For the first time in 10 years, it seemed the long, cold case had finally been solved. Carr was extradited back to Colorado to face charges, and the public waited for the trial that would finally answer the decades-old question. Investigators moved quickly to test the evidence against Carr's confession. They ran DNA samples against the unknown male DNA recovered from JonBenét's clothing in the crime scene. The results came back within days. John Mark Carr's DNA did not match the unknown profile at all. Long before Carr's false confession upended the case again, new forensic technology had already begun to rewrite the investigation's entire narrative. In 2003, a newly elected district attorney ordered a full retesting of every piece of physical evidence collected from the crime scene and JonBenét's body. This was the first time advanced modern DNA testing had been applied to the full collection of evidence, after decades of outdated forensic techniques left critical samples unanalyzed. Labs worked through each item methodically, starting with JonBenét's clothing and the cord used to bind her wrists. The results were unlike anything investigators had seen before. A clear, full DNA profile from an unknown male was recovered from not one, but multiple separate locations across the evidence. It turned up on the waistband of JonBenét's long johns. It turned up on the fabric of her underwear. Trace amounts matching the exact same profile were recovered from the nylon cord wrapped around her wrists and neck. Every separate sample produced the same consistent genetic code. This DNA did not belong to JonBenet. It did not belong to any of the Ramsey family members who had handled the evidence after the body was found. For years, the core theory held by Boulder police was that one or both of the Ramseys had killed JonBenet and covered up the crime. This single piece of forensic evidence blew that theory apart. Investigators cross-checked the unknown profile against DNA samples collected from John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey. None of them matched. Every genetic marker aligned to a single unknown man who had never been linked to the case, never been considered a suspect, and never set foot inside the Ramsey mansion as far as any investigator could prove. For the first time in 7 years, the entire direction of the investigation shifted. The focus that had stayed fixed on the Ramsey family from the very first day now turned outward, to the unknown stranger whose DNA had been waiting on the evidence all along. 5 years after the initial DNA breakthrough, new advances in forensic science made the next step possible. New touch DNA analysis techniques could now reliably pick up trace genetic material left by the simple contact of a hand against an object. This technology allowed investigators to confirm with near total certainty that the unknown male DNA found across the crime scene evidence had not been contaminated during processing or handling. The results were unambiguous. The unknown DNA profile did not match John Ramsey. It did not match Burke Ramsey. It did not match Patsy Ramsey. Every genetic marker ruled the entire family out as contributors to the DNA found on the evidence. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney made the formal announcement the Ramseys had waited 12 years to hear. The entire Ramsey family was formally exonerated in the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. A formal public letter of apology was drafted and sent to John Ramsey, acknowledging the decades of unfair suspicion the family had endured at the hands of law enforcement and the public. But Patsy Ramsey never got to read that letter. In June 2006, just 2 months before John Mark Carr's false confession, Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer. She died while millions of people around the world still publicly suspected she had killed her own 6-year-old daughter. The exoneration closed one chapter of the case, but it did not bring the answer the world still wanted. With the entire Ramsey family formally cleared, investigators turned their full attention to tracking down the unknown man who left his DNA across the crime scene evidence. The first logical step was to cross-check the new profile against the nation's largest collection of convicted offender DNA. The profile was formally entered into the Combined DNA Index System, the federal database maintained by the FBI that stores genetic profiles from millions of convicted criminals, arrested suspects, and crime scenes across every U.S. state. The system automatically cross-references new submissions against every existing profile in its records, flagging any match that could connect an unknown crime scene sample to a known offender. Investigators waited. They watched the system for any alert, any hit that would put a name to the unknown DNA, that would end the 1-2-year hunt for a killer in a single day. No alert came. No match was flagged. The profile sat in the database. No existing entry matched its unique genetic markers. Next, investigators manually cross-checked the profile against DNA samples collected from every person of interest who had ever been named in the case over the previous 12 years. They tested Bill McReynolds' sample. It did not match. They tested Michael Helgoth's retained DNA. It did not match. They tested Gary Oliva. It did not match. They tested every other person of interest who had been pulled into the investigation over the years. None of them matched the unknown profile. Every existing line of inquiry, every named suspect, every promising lead had run dry. For the second time in a decade, the case went cold. No arrests had been made. No new suspects had been identified. The only solid piece of evidence, the DNA profile, had led nowhere. The question that had gripped the world for 12 years remained unanswered. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? Today, nearly 30 years after that quiet Christmas night in Boulder, the case of JonBenét Ramsey remains officially open. The Boulder Police Department still issues annual public statements confirming the investigation is ongoing. Every year, as new DNA testing techniques are developed and refined, investigators pull out the remaining physical evidence from storage and run new tests. They test items that could not be analyzed with older technology, items that have sat untouched in evidence lockers for decades. New tips still come in every year from across the United States. Members of the public send new theories, new names, new observations that might have been missed in the chaos of the initial investigation. In total, more than 21,000 tips, letters, and emails have been received by investigators since December 1996. Investigators have traveled to 19 different states to follow new leads and spoken with more than 1,000 different witnesses over the course of 30 years. In November 2024, Netflix released a new documentary series that revisited the entire case from start to finish. The series uncovered new details that had been buried in old case files and re-examined old evidence that investigators had overlooked in the early, messy days of the probe. The renewed public interest sparked a fresh wave of tips, all of which are currently being processed and followed up by the assigned investigative team. Somewhere out there, the person who walked into that large Boulder mansion on Christmas night, 1996, has never been held accountable. They killed a 6-year-old girl, left her body in a dark, locked wine cellar, and walked away unseen. They could be living in an ordinary neighborhood, in a quiet suburb, holding down a job, raising a family, living an unremarkable life that no one connects to this unsolved murder. They could be sitting in a maximum security prison cell, convicted of a different violent crime, Their DNA profile never entered into the federal system for a match to be found. They could have died years ago, taking the truth of that night with them to the grave, their identity hidden forever. No matter where they are, after nearly 3 decades of investigation, catastrophic investigative mistakes, public obsession, false confessions, and breakthroughs that led nowhere, one question remains as sharp and as urgent as it was on that cold December morning in 1996. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? The answer has never been found, and after 28 years of searching, it may never be known.